Yeah? Good. Hi! Hi, everybody! Awesome! Yay, I'm so excited you guys are all here. This is gonna be so much fun. We'll just give a couple minutes for everybody to kind of come on and get settled. We're gonna go over our supply list first, just to make sure everybody has everything. Who here is going to be following along real time? Is anybody? I saw a couple people posted their pictures of all of their setup. That was awesome. It's so cool to see everybody following along at home. Awesome. It's okay if you don't have your stuff ready. We can, I mean, you're going to be able to rewatch this as much as you want. So if you want to go back later, if you just kind of want to watch it all and get an idea first and then go back and, you know, work on your project, or just want to watch it for fun, that's totally fine too, whatever you guys want to do. So Mom and Dad are here too. They are fielding questions for me.
Hi, everybody. I want to ask if they've got their microwaves closed.
Oh yes, that is one thing that I wanted to mention, guys. I have my microwave, I don't know if you can see it, set up right back here. We are going to be using the microwave quite a bit today, so if you have your microwave, it'll help to have it kind of close to you, just so that we can go back and forth. I'm going to be just kind of giving you, you know, if you are following along, you know, at home, I'm going to be giving you a couple minutes, you know, just like in between each thing, to make sure everybody can catch up and make sure we're all on the same page for each step as we go through. But it will help to have your microwave right here next to you, so in the few minutes before we start, if you want to just kind of bring that over if possible. If not, it's okay. You know, we'll just kind of play it by ear, but
safety first.
Yes, safety first. Make sure everybody's got their gloves.
We'll say hi to Scoop and Save in beautiful Canada.
Yes, oh my gosh, there's so many people here.
The Philippines.
That's awesome.
I'm on a bit of a lag.
A little bit of a lag, yeah. I have my iPad set up here too, so I can see the view once I tilt you guys down. So it's a couple minutes, or a couple seconds, I think. Perfect. So yeah, once I am kind of start working, I'll have Mom and Dad answer any questions. So if you guys have any questions throughout the whole thing, please feel free to write in the chat. And if you're watching this on a later date, I will be going back and just kind of making sure that there's no questions, you know, that you guys may leave then, so I'll be answering. And you can always just message me later too, if you prefer. But they will be kind of shouting out you guys' questions as we go, since I'll be kind of concentrating, and that way I can answer them for you as we go. Hi guys!
What gloves do you recommend?
The gloves that I recommend are going to be a cotton glove, so just like a thin, almost like the white chocolate gloves, or you can use a thicker glove if you have more sensitive hands, and then I use a nitrile glove on top of that. You can also use latex gloves, but I prefer not vinyl. The vinyl ones I find melt, but the nitrile is my favorite, just because I don't like to use latex in case whoever you're baking for has an allergy. You don't want any of the latex to touch their food.
Everyone's saying stay safe in your difficult times. That's Mavis, Patricia's mom.
Hi! Yes, I'm so thankful that you guys are tuning in. This is going to be really fun to kind of do something all together. You know, everybody's kind of missing that right now with not being able to see all your friends, or if you're in a cake club, or, you know, just have play dates with your cake and cookie friends. So I think it's going to be a really good, you know, chance to kind of catch up with everybody and work on something together. It'll be a nice break from everything that's going on out there. And we have everybody on Instagram back here too, so hi guys! If you have any questions, again, write in the chat, and we'll be answering them as we go. We'll start here in just a few minutes. Looks like everybody's still kind of coming on, so just give them another minute.
Kat Garcia wants to know, what are you making?
Today we are going to be making our shaker cookies. So this is my Ladybug. You can't see because it's upright right now, but it has sprinkles in it, and we're going to be making the shaker cookie today. So this is going to be a 3-layered cookie. We're going to be decorating it with fondant. You can also use modeling chocolate or gum paste if you wanted to, or icing if you're a piper. You know, you can obviously vary this, but we have our sprinkles inside, we have our Isomalt ladybugs and flowers, and then of course our crystal clear windows here. So we will be making our little shaker cookies today. I was seeing in the pictures that you guys posted that everybody had some different shapes and different sizes, so that'll be really cool. Make sure that when we're done with this project that you post your finished pieces and tag me. I would love to see it. So definitely post your finished pieces. Maybe I'll make a post and everybody can post them in the comments too, so that we can see each other's, and that way we can kind of see everything that you guys are making. Even if you're making them later, I definitely want to see what you guys do with the project.
Sydney, Yvonne Darby wants to know, when working with Isomalt, should you have the room a certain temperature? It's nice here in San Diego. I want to open my doors.
So you do want to have it room temperature. You don't want it too hot or too cool in your room. Mostly what's important is humidity. So if you have the AC on, it's going to be best, just mostly because of the humidity. It'll take out a lot of the humidity in the air if you are in a humid climate. But a little bit cooler is better for Isomalt, but you don't want it too cold because then pieces are going to set up way too fast and you won't have as much time to work with it. So I usually say below about 78 degrees you want to keep your Isomalt pieces, but you also don't want it too cold or to be directly under a draft just because everything's going to set up. But it's more important about the humidity that you don't, it's better to have the AC on for that reason.
Lala would like to know, do you only use Simi transfer paper for Isomalt, or can you also use regular icing paper?
Yeah, you can use both for sure. It's going to give you different looks. The transfer sheets are going to give you a see-through pattern. You print on both of them just the same on your edible printer, but the transfer sheets will give you a see-through pattern, whereas the icing sheets will give you an opaque white background so that you can't see through it. Different ones have different uses, just depends on what you're doing, if you want a solid background or if you want to be able to see through it.
I think you can get started.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so if you guys are ready, we will go ahead and start. First thing, I just want to go over our supply list really quick, and I'll talk about some of the things that I'm using. So I posted my little supply list here that I'll be reading from, and if you got one of our Ladybug kits, it will be in there as well. I just want to go over everything really quick, and that way we can make sure we have everything. So if you have the kit, we'll have that ready, or just a small flower mold, a small ladybug mold, and some Isomalt. So I have all of my molds out here. Of course, feel free to vary if you have different flower molds or anything that you want to add to it. And then I'm using my clear Isomalt here. I'm going to be using the same amount you guys are. I have a bag right here, so I'll show you how I'm going to divide it and split it up and everything for the different colors. So we have that. Let's see, we have our mats that we're going to be working on. So you can do this on a silicone mat. I prefer a non-stick liner. I made an Instagram story about these a couple of days ago, but basically they're just like a coated Teflon baking liner that you can use in your ovens, but they work really good for pouring Isomalt on. So I just have my little half size here, and we're going to be pouring directly onto that to make sure that the pieces are going to release nice and easy. So that's what I'm going to be pouring everything on, and then let's see what else we have. We have our pre-baked cookies. So I have my 3 rings right here. On my cookies, what I like to do, I bake them with my construction gingerbread recipe that I know I sent a lot of you guys, but you can really use whatever cookie recipe that you usually use. That's totally fine. And what I like to do is I actually, if they're not perfectly even or level, I do take, or if you have rough edges or anything, I do take a piece of sandpaper, because they are construction gingerbread, they're pretty hard, pretty hardy, so I do kind of sand them with like a thicker grit sandpaper, and so that's just going to make sure that they're nice and flat when they sit together, and you won't have any sprinkles leaking or anything like that, and so you don't have any rough edges. So those are the cookies that I'm going to be using. Let's see, we also are going to want to have our cutters that we used for the cookies originally so that we can cut out our fondant to be the same shape. We want a rolling pin, some piping gel, an X-Acto knife. Make sure that you have another work mat that can be cut on. So I have just like a little plastic work mat over here. It's just like one of those ones from the dollar store, like the little cutting board mats. If you have a nice thick one, thick cutting board, that's fine too, but I just don't want to take the X-Acto onto my baking mat or onto my silicone mat. So I'm going to have that standing by for when we do the fondant part of the decorating. Let's see. So make sure that you have your gloves. We were just talking about those a couple minutes ago. Make sure to wear your gloves when working with Isomalt because it is about 300 degrees when it is melted, so we don't want to touch it or stick our finger in it or anything like that. Make sure you wear your cotton gloves first and then your latex or nitrile medical gloves over those, just to make sure you protect your hands. Be very careful. I know some people are intimidated by Isomalt because it is so hot, but remember, you guys make cakes, you cook, you bake, you make cookies, right? So it's, the oven and stove is way hotter than that. So as long as you wear your gloves and you're being cautious, everybody will be good. Let's see, we are going to have some silicone bowls or glass or Pyrex bowls to melt the ice melt into, and then also your microwave to melt it. If you prefer to use the stove, that's fine too. We're going to use our little chef's blowtorch today. We're going to be using our sprinkles, which I will talk a little bit about once we get into it, and our fondant. So I'm going to use white fondant today. You can also use yellow because we're going to paint green on top of it. Let's see.
Cutters?
Yes. The size cutters that I use are going to be 4" and 2 3/4 inch. Just circle cutters. So I have them right here, but I like to have a nice big window in my cookies rather than a lot of cookie showing, but that is completely personal preference. It really doesn't matter as long as you have a little space for your sprinkles to go or for your little window to go. That's really all that matters. So they can be any shape, they can be any thickness. I'm going to be using 3 thin cookies today, but you can also use thicker cookies, and you could do less of them, which I'll talk about once we start pouring them, how you can kind of vary it a little depending on what you like to do.
Like your
Yes.
cookie.
Yes, exactly. So the cookie that we're going to be making today, I'll talk a little bit about too. So this is going to be a focal point cookie or a centerpiece cookie. Obviously, everything on here is edible. So you can eat the Isomalt. It's made from beets. It's 100% edible. You can eat the fondant. The cookie itself, everything that we're putting on this is going to be edible. But usually, because people will sometimes want more of like a, you can bite into it cookie rather than a cookie with a sucker in the middle. This would be more of a focal point or like a centerpiece cookie. So you would make a couple of these depending on how many cookies are in your display or in your order, and then the other cookies around it would have maybe a nice small accent. So if I was going to make this cookie with my ice melt window, this would be kind of like the cute focal point, and then I would, on the rest of the cookies, just kind of make them tie into the theme, maybe put a little flower and a ladybug to have kind of a lollipop or a hard candy sucker on there for them. But, I mean, I would basically just tell, your clients that this is a lollipop with a cookie border, so it's totally edible if they want to eat it, but if you wanted to make more cookies around it that were just solid cookie, you can add ice malt accents, and that way everything kind of ties it all together. Okay, so we got our fondant, we have our different edible paints and colors. These can vary, which I will talk about too once we get into it, as far as which colors you can use, because you can use lots of different colors for different effects, but I'm going to be using a mixture of some gel colors diluted with a dilution solution from Artisan Accents. I'm going to also be using some edible airbrush color and some powdered color as well from the Sugar Art. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways that you can use different kinds of color, but you can use whatever you have at home. That's just what I'm going to be using today. Let's see, some different paintbrushes. I use mostly fan brushes, flat brushes, and some detail brushes for what we're going to be doing today specifically, but again, whatever you have, you can definitely make that work. That's just what I have set out here. And then I also like to use, you can use a toothpick for this, but I really, really like a little ball tool. This is just a tiny little ball tool here, has 2 different sizes, and I like to do this for the dots on the centers of the flowers and on the ladybugs as well. And then finally, we're going to be using some clear edible glaze spray. This is going to be the key so that your sprinkles don't stick and so that your pieces are going to stay nice and clear.
Sidney, Susan would like to know if you can flavor Isomalt.
Yes, you absolutely can flavor Isomalt. It's going to be best to use an oil-based flavoring, so if you use an extract, it's going to be more of a alcohol-based or, some sort of liquid that's not an oil, and it'll evaporate. So an oil-based flavoring is best, like the luring candy oils work great. Just put a couple drops in, and it will flavor it any flavor you want. Okay, all good. No questions so far. Instagram's good. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. Again, if you have any questions, just type them in the chat and we will go through and answer them as we work. But I'm going to go ahead and switch your angle down now. So just give me 1 second to pan the camera down. Make sure you guys can see. Right.
It's a little on a line.
Yes. Yeah, I have my iPad set up here, guys, so I can see your view, but it's on a little bit of a delay, so I'm just going to give it a second to catch up so I can make sure you guys can see everything that I'm going to do. Here, let me...
Can you use something else if you don't have the edible spray?
You can. The edible spray is going to be the best. I don't like to use the bottled glaze that paints on just because it's going to leave brush strokes and it can be way too thick. So I like to use the spray as going to be your best bet when working with it. There we go. Okay, perfect. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. So I have my cookie here. I'm just going to put him off to the side and move my mats off to the side for now.
So, Sid,
yes.
like where the cookie is in the words?
Yes, I can move this up a little bit. Share here. Okay, that should be a little bit more centered too. And I think if you tap here, maybe not. Maybe that's just on my phone. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. So I have my Isomalt. So of course, we are using Simi Isomalt today. So Simi Isomalt is pre-cooked and ready to use, and it's going to be pre-tempered. So basically all you have to do is melt it down. Just melt your Isomalt for 30 seconds and then 15-second intervals until it is a liquid. And then it's basically going to be done. There's no temperatures, there's no recipes. So I'm just going to melt pretty much all of this at first, because we're going to be doing our clear centers to begin with. So I'll go ahead and open this up. And I have my silicone bowl here. This one is from Pampered Chef. This is just a big bowl. If you have our Isomalt Basics kit, you can use the small bowl that comes in that. That's totally fine. But the specific one is from Pampered Chef. And I'm just going to melt. We'll go ahead and just melt all of our Isomalt.
Yeah, it's backwards. Is that okay?
It's flipped. Yeah, that's okay, because there's not going to be too many words from here on.
Rochelle's saying that she hasn't been able to get the edible spray because Amazon isn't shipping non-essential items.
No. What you can do, if it's only going to be a very short amount of time, is you can use a like an oil, like a vegetable oil, very, very thinly coated on your Isomalt. That's not going to last very long. You may have to reapply it. It's really going to be only a short fix, but between that and maybe if you can seal your pieces in an airtight container or a Ziploc, that is going to be, if you can't get the glaze, that's going to be your best bet. So sealing it is going to lock out the moisture, whether you're doing that in a airtight container or you're doing it with a glaze. So just kind of remember to take it out as late as you can.
There's a lot of small businesses that are still open, though.
Yes.
That really would like your business. So a lot of the cake shops are doing online shopping.
Yes, definitely. So if you can support one of them, chances are that they'll probably have it in stock more so even than Amazon.
Sweet Chalet.
Yeah.
Sheer Celebrations, Global Sugar Art, Johnson Brothers, Over the Top.
Yeah, Baker
Cake
C&C.
Supplies, Baker C&C, all of, if you look at the list on our website of other retailers, those small businesses are still open and really, really would appreciate your business.
Yes, definitely.
We got a question from Instagram.
Yes.
Can you color the Isomalt?
Yes, you can color the Isomalt. We're going to be coloring our Isomalt a little bit later, but we are going to use either an edible airbrush color or we're going to use a powdered color, petal dust, or you can also use a luster dust if you wanted it shimmery mixed in. You just don't want to use gel colors. But in just a little bit, I will be showing that as well.
And one more.
Yep.
At what temperature can we add the flavor?
I add it as soon as it's melted. So when I bring it to a boil, which is what I'm about to do, after it's melted, we'll mix in the flavoring. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to take my Isomalt in the microwave. We're going to do it for about 30 seconds and then 15-second intervals after that. And that way it's just going to bring it to a slow kind of meltdown. So if you're following along at home, go ahead and throw your Isomalt into the microwave. I do start at 30 seconds and then switch to 15-second intervals. You can vary that as you get to know your microwave because obviously different power levels in different areas is going to be different wattages. So just kind of use that as a basis and then just kind of figure it out from there if you need to do a couple extra or less seconds.
Can you, Carla asked, can you keep remelting your leftover Isomalt?
Yes, you definitely can keep remelting your Isomalt. It is going to be pretty much good all the time. Hang on, I'm having microwave technical difficulties here.
We also have a question. Why can't you color with gel?
The reason that you can't color with gel color mixed into the ice malt is the gelatin will actually break down the ice malt. So if you are mixing gelatin in, it's not going to allow the ice malt to dry properly, and it's going to just not set up right. So I prefer to use a liquid, either a water or an alcohol-based color.
Eliana's out of piping gel. Can she substitute glucose syrup later?
Yes, that's definitely fine. You can also use like a corn syrup would work fine. You can use icing, you can use chocolate. We're going to use the piping gel to attach the fondant onto the cookie and the fondant together, so you could even potentially use water or alcohol if you wanted to. I just find that piping gel or something else that's kind of syrupy is going to be a little bit stronger. Okay, so check my ice malt here. I can see that it's starting to melt, but it's not quite all melted. Just a little bit in the center is, so I'm going to pop it back into the microwave. My microwave is not quite as strong, so I'm going to do a little bit longer intervals just because I have a smaller microwave.
Looks like we have probably 6 different countries watching us.
That's so
Thank you for joining
awesome.
us.
Thank you guys. I'm so excited.
Cookie Shop says hello from Chile.
Hello. Thanks for watching.
We have a question.
Yes.
A little bit back, Kelly had asked about what is a good printer and paper.
For the edible paper, what I like to use is I like to use the Icing Images paper, the premium icing sheets. They also have our transfer sheets too, and then also the printer that they recommend.
And that's icingimages.com.
Yep, icingimages.com. Okay, so I can see my ice malt is melting. It's almost there. I don't stir my ice malt. That's going to be one really big thing to working with Isomalt and getting it crystal clear. That is going to be very important to not getting bubbles in your piece. So I can see that it's melting and bubbling, but there's some chunks in there. I'm not going to poke at it or prod at it to try and break them up. I'm going to let it do its thing in the microwave, so I'm just going to go ahead and put it back in because I see that it's not all melted, and let it keep going. It's not like chocolate where you have to continually keep moving it around for it to not burn. Ice malt can burn if you heat it up way too much at once or way too quickly, but it's going to have a much higher burn temperature than real sugar or than chocolate. So it's better to just let it all melt, because if you stir it, you're going to mix in air bubbles. Our ice malt is manufactured specifically to be crystal clear to start. There's no air mixed into it, so you want to make sure that you don't add any additional air into it. That way you're going to get those nice clear windows.
Cookie up just a tiny bit. It'll take me a minute to see if that's right.
All right, perfect. So I have my ice malt melted now. I brought it to a boil, so it is boiling and bubbling, and I'm just going to let it sit. That's another thing to get all of the air out, is I'm going to let the ice malt sit and settle before I pour it into my piece. And so that is just going to take all the bubbles, and hot air rises, right? So any air that was trapped in just from melting down between the tiles, it will all rise and kind of pop and boil itself out. And so I'm just going to give that a minute to settle.
Can I use the same Isomalt for lollipops?
Absolutely, yeah. Our ice malt can be used for lots of different things, pouring into molds, lollipops. You can pull with it. You can do blown sugar with it. It's very versatile. Okay, everybody doing good? You're getting your ice malt melted. So I can see that the bubbles are still kind of popping, so I'm going to give it another second and just wait until I don't see any more bubbles moving or popping or rising. It's completely flat. While it's doing that, I'm just going to put it off to the side and get my mat ready. So I'm actually going to switch out mats. I don't want to work on a silicone mat with my Teflon mat on top of it, because you could have some rising or some bubbling from underneath the silicone mat. What happens is silicone mats can sometimes bubble up if you get any air trapped underneath them. So I'm just going to use my thin Teflon coated mat here, and that is going to be a lot thinner and lighter weight so that the ice melt can press it down and hold it down. All right, and then I'll just set up my cookies here. Give that one more minute, it's almost there. So I have my 3 cookies. I picked out my favorite one for the very top cookie, and I'm going to be filling in the top cookie taking out that middle cookie and filling in the bottom cookie. So I have my 2 cookies here that I'm going to fill, and then this middle one I'm going to leave empty. So you can, if your cookies are thicker than mine, instead what you can do is you can fill in both of these, but you don't have to fill them up all the way. You can leave part of the cookie not filled. So in other words, if the cookie was this thick or this thick all together in one, what you can do is just fill up about half of that on 2 cookies, and then you'll naturally still have a gap between them that your sprinkles can fit, if that makes sense. I like to just make sure that my sprinkles are going to fit nicely, so that's why I do the 3 layers, but it really depends on how thick you're going to pour your, or how thick you're going to bake your cookie.
Go slightly up.
Slightly up.
Yeah, it takes a minute for that.
Yeah, the lag, no problem.
Somebody asked, when you add flavor, do you need to stir? That's from Pink Belly Treats.
Yes, that's a very good point. So when you mix in flavor, or later when we mix in color, you obviously do have to stir it, right? You can't just put it in there. You have to kind of stir it and make sure it's all distributed. So if you do stir your Isomalt to mix something into it, you want to make sure that you re-microwave it after and bring it back to a boil. Because again, hot air rises, so if you bring it back to a boil, all the air will kind of rise and pop itself out, and that way you'll be left with crystal clear Isomalt.
Sprinkles with a Z asks, my lollipops get sticky after some time. May I please know why it happens? Thank you so much.
Yeah, so Isomalt can get sticky from humidity. That's going to be why it's getting kind of sticky or cloudy. That's why I use the clear edible glaze spray. That is what's going to keep it super nice and clear. We're going to actually be glazing the inside and the outside of these cookies, but with lollipops you just want to spray the front and back as soon as you can. Like as soon as the pieces are cool, they're assembled, right before you're going to put them in the bags, you spray them with the glaze, and that will kind of lock out the moisture and keep them from getting sticky.
What thickness did you roll your cookies?
My cookies are going to be about 1/4 of an inch thick, and that's just how I do my cookies, so it's not vital. You can do, if you have something that you normally do, you can follow that. Like I said, if you have thicker cookies, you don't have to fill the Isomalt up to the tippy top. You can leave it about half full, and that way you can use less cookies.
Are you flipping one cookie?
I am not flipping one cookie because I'm doing the 3 layers, so I'm going to have that gap in there regardless with my 3rd cookie, but if you wanted to and you're going to decorate the entire cookie and you won't see if any were to run up and underneath on the flipped cookie onto the front, you absolutely could flip your cookies so that the Isomalt is kind of separated apart from each other.
What is the difference between your Isomalt that you can eat and others you can't?
Our Isomalt is all, and pretty much all Isomalt should be edible. I mean, obviously make sure of that, but Isomalt in general is made from beets. It's a byproduct of beet sugar, so you should be able to eat it just like a sugar-free hard candy, like a Jolly Rancher. Sugar-free Jolly Ranchers are made out of Isomalt if you look at the ingredients. So obviously those have like preservatives and, you know, different fillers and things mixed into them, so I would make sure that, you know, you use a pure undiluted version like our pre-cooked Isomalt and not just melt down Jolly Ranchers because the texture won't work the same, but it should be all edible. If it's Isomalt, it's made from beets. So.
And oh, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Do you have a pan to make them? You just used a cutter, correct?
Yeah, I just used a cutter. I used a metal cookie cutter and just punched it out, and that's what we'll use to punch out our fondant later too.
And Desi's asking if we're using our amazing lamp for keeping warm.
Hi, Desi. Yeah, you can. I'm not using my lamp today just because we're going to be pouring pretty quickly, but you absolutely can keep your bowls of Isomalt that are melted warm underneath your lamps, and that'll give you a little bit of extra time. But otherwise, if your Isomalt starts to thicken, you can just go ahead and reheat it in the microwave. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead now. You see how my Isomalt is completely flat. It's still nice and liquidy, but it's not boiling or bubbling or anything. You may have 1 or 2 stray bubbles stuck to the bowl or on the surface, but we can melt those later. So all I'm going to do is go ahead and fill just enough Isomalt to fill up my cookies. Uh-oh.
Oops, sorry, Instagram.
So I just pour very slowly for Instagram here, who just fell down. I will pour the next cookie. You got it? Alright, so I'm just going to pour just enough to cover the bottom. So if you're following along at home, go ahead and pour.
Can you pour your Isomalt into something other than the mat you're using?
You can use a silicone mat. You can use a Silpat mat. You just have to make sure that your Isomalt has cooled down a little bit more so that it's not super hot, because that's what can make the silicone mat bubble up and rise up a little bit. You can also use a piece of greased foil if you want to. Just put a little bit of cooking spray on the foil, and that should allow it to release easy. You can also use food-safe vinyl as well. Now, if I have any bubbles really quick before these cool, and while they're still nice and hot, we're going to pop any surface bubbles. So I usually just give it a minute to rise, because it is very thick texture, so it may take a minute for all the bubbles to rise to the surface. And then I will very lightly just torch over the tops, and all those little bubbles should pop. If you have any bubbles that are stuck to the underside of your mat, that actually I can see I have a couple little patches, we will get those away later. So once it cools, we can flip them over and we can torch those from the back, which we're going to do. So don't worry about those. Just very lightly torch over the top. As long as you keep moving, you won't hurt your mat or your cookies or the Isomalt itself. Make sure that you don't keep torching, because the more you torch, it could bring it back to a boil. So just a very light kind of overall with the torch.
If you have bubbles around your container, do you still need to wait?
No, if you have bubbles stuck to the actual bowl, you can see I have some bubbles stuck to my bowl. Those are fine. They're going to stay there. Maybe one or two will kind of let go and go into your Isomalt, but that's what the torching step is for. So stuck bubbles to the bowl is fine. You just don't want a ton of bubbles mixed in. All right, so we're going to let these cool. These are probably going to take about 15 minutes or so to cool at room temperature. I am working on a metal table, so it may take even a little longer. If you're on a cool surface, it may take a little bit less time, because if you're working on like a marble or a granite, make sure that you don't touch them. You don't want to test them to see if they're done with your finger. You'll use a toothpick or something, or a tool later. We're just going to put them somewhere off to the sides that we're not going to touch them, and continue working on our decorations.
Let's see. When using molds, do they need to be sprayed first to keep from sticking?
It depends on what kind of mold you're using. So if you're using a silicone mold, generally you will not have to spray those. There's only very few instances, like with our really, really deep crystal molds and things, that I will spray it with some cooking spray, but generally all of our silicone molds you don't want to spray. They don't need it. The only time you're going to use a little bit of cooking spray is if you're using a hard candy plastic mold, or if you're using a metal mold. Those will need to be sprayed, but silicone, like we're using today, does not. Okay.
And our
yes.
friend Anna from Chicago says, is it okay to use the torch on that mat?
Yes. Hi, Anna. You can use the torch on this mat. You don't want to torch too much on it, because it is slightly more susceptible to heat than the silicone mats are, so you could get little burn spots. But I found even if I accidentally get a little burnt spot, it still works. You can still pour on it and everything, and it's fine. But as long as you keep moving, you'll be totally fine. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and open up my molds, so if you're following along at home, go ahead and get your molds ready, whatever silicone molds you would like to decorate. I'm going to be using our little silicone ladybug mold here, and then our little 2-flower mold here, but again, if you have some different ones at home, you can definitely use those to decorate. And now I'm going to be pouring those. So I'm going to pour out a little bit of my Isomalt into a smaller bowl. If you only have one bowl, you can just pour some of your Isomalt out onto your mat, kind of, you don't want it to touch the cookie, you just want it to be like off to the side, make a little puddle for it to cool, and then you can use your bowl to color in, and then we will let the excess after we use that color cool and switch it out for the new stuff that you poured out, if that makes sense. You can use the same bowl, but if you have a different bowl, basically we're just going to pour it into one more of our bowls here. My Isomalt's getting kind of thick. You may have to reheat it to get it pourable.
Sidney Irma from Pampered Chef is on. She posted her link for the balls.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you, Irma. We love your balls.
Yes, definitely. These bowls are awesome. I believe this is the medium size of the bowls. There's also one smaller one and one larger one, so it's a 1 cup, 2 cup, and 3 cup in the kit, and they are fantastic. I absolutely love them for Isomalt. Okay, so I'm just dividing the rest of my Isomalt pretty much in half. You don't need a ton of Isomalt for these little things. You can see the size of these compared to the size of a tile. You're going to get probably 1 or 2 of these out of each tile of Isomalt that you had originally. So we're just going to split in half the remaining bit of Isomalt to color. So I'm going to pop this back into the microwave since it's not really liquidy enough to stir in color anymore. And then we will add some color. So I'm just going to do about 15 seconds or so. The first color that we're going to mix in is going to be an edible airbrush color. So I am using a Super Red from Chef Master. You can also use Americolor. This is a water-based color. You can also use an alcohol-based color. That's fine too, as long as it's not a gel. Okay, so you can see I just melted back down my Isomalt here and move these out of the way. I'm going to use, just because I have a bunch of these silicone spatulas, but you can also use a toothpick to stir, you can use a popsicle stick, you can use a regular spatula, as long as it's heat proof, it's not going to melt, not a plastic one, but you can use anything just to kind of stir a couple drops of your red airbrush color into the Isomalt. I'm going to start with 3, because this is a pretty bright color, but we can see afterwards if we want to add any more. We're going to do our Ladybug first. If you want to vary the colors a little bit, you definitely can. If you'd rather do the pretty orange ladybugs or do a super funky, you know, purple ladybug, that's totally fine. Right, so that seems like a nice bright red. That will be perfect. I now am going to reheat this. So remember how I said I go ahead and reheat after I stir to make sure that there's no air mixed in, because we're using a color that is transparent, so that would be an airbrush color. You will see any bubbles that you mixed in. So I'm popping it back in the microwave and I'm going to reheat it for just a few seconds, again about 15 more seconds before I pour it into my mold.
Debbie Coughlin would like to know if you know the Ladybug song.
Mm-hmm. I do not know the Ladybug song.
I think you're going to have to sing it to us.
Uh-huh. Alright, so I can see I brought it back to a boil. It's good to have just a nice kind of slow boil, and you don't want it too furious because you don't want to risk overflowing the Isomalt, so as long as it's boiling and, you know, kind of popping, that's all you need to get all that hot air to rise. So again, just like with the windows, I'm just going to give this a second. You can also check on your window cookies again and see if any more bubbles had risen up to the top, and you can give it another torch really quick. The reason that I want to torch those when it's still liquid is because if you were to have any bubbles and you go to torch them away later when it's cool, it's a lot harder to get them to fill back over because the Isomalt's cool. It'll just make little craters if any bubbles pop. So you want to get as many as you can while it's liquid, and then we'll get those underneath bubbles after it cools.
Just a tiny bit up. Just
tiny bit up.
Teeny weeny. There.
There? Okay, perfect. Okay, so I can see my Isomalt has calmed down now, and I like to use a little, you can use a toothpick, you can use a silicone tool, or anything to kind of spread it into the crevices. I'm just going to use my sugar shaper because I have it here on hand, but you can definitely just use a toothpick for this.
Love those innovative sugar.
Yeah, they are awesome. And I'm just pouring almost to the top, so you can see I didn't fill in his little head or his little feet with the Isomalt because I want to spread it. If I try and fill in too much, I could overflow the mold, so I'm just going to push the Isomalt that I did pour in the main cavity into those little details, and it gives you a much cleaner edge. But don't worry if you still have rough edges or if it's not perfectly filled in, because we're going to clean all of this up later. Okay, so I'm just going to let that cool. This is much smaller than the big window cookies, so it's not going to take very long at all for these to cool, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how cool your room is. So the other Isomalt that we have in the bowl that I left out, I'm going to go ahead and heat that up so that we can mix some of our white powder in. Use that for our little flowers. So both the white flowers and the yellow flowers on our cookie here, I'm using white Isomalt as a base, and then you can paint on the yellow later, depending on if you want yellow flowers, if you want white flowers. But again, if you have different colors at home and you want to vary it, go for it. You can either mix the color in now, or you can paint on top like I'm going to show you for painting onto the yellow flowers.
Someone said you're not wearing your gloves.
That is a very good observation. I am not wearing my gloves. I've been doing this for so many years, my hands do not feel heat anymore, so it's easier for me to demonstrate, but I always do recommend wearing gloves when working with Isomalt because it is hot.
But if you wear your gloves, you're not allowed to, or if you don't wear your gloves, you're not allowed to post your pictures of your burns. There's no sympathy for burns.
Exactly. Alright, so I checked my Isomalt. It was still a little bit too thick, so I'm popping it back in for 10 more seconds. Up a little, move my Ladybug. Alright. So I can see I brought it back to a boil. You can mix the color in when it's boiling or after it's settled. Either way, it's fine. But you just want to make sure that you re-microwave after you mix the color in. So now for the opaque finish. So remember how I said the airbrush colors are going to give you more of a clear, transparent finish. If you mix in powders, it's going to give you an opaque finish. So what I'm using is from the Sugar Art. They are my favorite powdered color. This is their Elite color, which is like a matte petal dust, just in white. I'm going to mix a little bit of that into the Isomalt, and that will give you more of like a porcelain or a plastic finish rather than a transparent glass finish. And if you want to be mixing in flavors, you can do that at this point too. Again, it's kind of up to you. So the key with powdered colors is to keep mixing it. So I'm mixing, because sometimes the powder, when it touches the liquid, can kind of like seize just a tiny bit and kind of want to stick and clump together. So you really want to make sure that you can break those pieces up. And then when we re-microwave this, now this is opaque, right? So it's not as big of a deal if you have air or bubbles mixed in because you can't see them. But the heating actually, I find, breaks up the powder really nicely and makes sure you don't have any chunks. So after I give this a good mix, I can still see that there's some little chunks in there that haven't broken up yet. I'm going to pop this back in the microwave to a boil for maybe about 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'll give it a stir again after that, and that should break up any little bits of color that haven't mixed in yet.
Any questions?
Everybody doing good?
Everybody got their windows poured?
All right. Okay, and remember that you can go back and watch this too. So if you want to, kind of focus on one thing a little bit longer and skip one section, you can go back and watch certain sections over again. So if you wanted to just take longer to really make sure that your window cookies are perfect, don't feel like you have to completely follow along or, be rushed. It's totally at your own pace. That's the beauty of doing a live like this, is that you can go back and watch it as many times or at any point that you want to.
Question, does adding color make it cool faster?
Yes, adding color definitely affects the texture, just because when it's clear, it's just pure undiluted isomalt, but once you start adding things into it, it is going to affect the texture. So it's the same thing as if you work with white fondant compared to red or black fondant that has a lot of color mixed in, it is going to be a little bit different. So just kind of play around with the kinds of colors that you're using and the amounts that you're using. If it is affecting it a lot, you may want to just not quite add as much, or maybe find a different kind of color if you find that it's not really reacting well with the isomalt. You just kind of have to play it by ear a little bit and test it out. Okay, so my isomalt I brought it back to a boil and then let it settle again after giving it one more stir, and I will go ahead and pour these tiny little flowers here. So again, I'm not worrying about filling the mold all the way up because I can spread it around a lot easier than I can pour it. Pouring risks overflowing sometimes, so maybe I'll add one more drop. Remember, you can also take a toothpick or a tool in the bowl of isomalt and drip pieces in. So if I wanted to take my tool and scoop and drip in, you could definitely do that.
Evelyn's wondering, her color is not quite pure white. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's definitely fine. I mean, obviously different kinds of color are going to give you different effects, so it may even work out to your advantage and give you an effect that you never would have thought of to begin with.
And it could be real pretty because, like, petals, a lot of times you can see through them.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. It'll give you more of like a translucent effect. It also depends on how much you add. If I didn't add quite as much of this powder, it would give it more of like a milky, almost like a clouded or a frosty look that you can see through a little bit. I added quite a good amount of powder, so it gave it a completely solid finish. But depending on how much you add, it'll either be more or less translucent.
They won't have quite as many pieces, right?
Mm-hmm. On the finished piece? Yes. So that is another good point. I did a pretty good amount. I think I made 2 or 3 batches of each of the 3 ladybugs and then a couple rounds of the 2 flowers. I'm not going to be doing all of these today. Our cookie's going to be slightly different than the one that I have here, and that's totally fine. If you choose to, after this demonstration, go back and make more pieces to decorate, that's totally up to you. You can make as many or as few as you want. I'm just going to be doing 1 ladybug and 2 flowers on my piece, and just attaching those on. And if you want to, just for time's sake, I don't want to make you guys watch the whole thing over and over again, so if you want to continue after the demonstration and keep making them, that's totally fine. So again, these won't take very long to cool, so I'm just going to go ahead and put them off to the side, and we will start to get some of our paints ready and our sprinkles ready because our window cookies are going to be almost cool. Alright, so I'm just going to grab a couple things here. Alright. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's go ahead and talk about our sprinkles. So I actually went ahead and just made up, I took some sprinkles that I already had that I really liked the colors and I thought that they would match, and I just made my own mix of sprinkles. You can see I have some little shiny white pearls, I have some black pearls, some little red like nonpareils, and then this really, really pretty kind of dark silvery, like almost like a cake sprinkle, some sanding sugar, and I just mix those all those together in a bag. But if you have a pre-made sprinkle mix that you like, I know that like Sprinkle Pop has some really, really pretty ones, and you know, there's lots of different sprinkle mixes out there, so you just want to make sure that they're going to fit in the gap. So you notice that I used a lot of very small sprinkles because my cookies aren't going to be super, super thick, so it's not a huge gap. I don't want like huge chunky pieces. Of course, you can always take those out too if you have a sprinkle mix you really like and just some of them don't fit. Just take those pieces out, but you just want to make sure that they are the right size to go inside of your window cookie so that they can move around and you get that really nice free moving shaky effect. Okay, so I'm going to put that off to the side because our cookies are almost ready, and while we are waiting for our window cookies to cool a little bit longer, I'm going to start getting my paints ready. So you can just go on a paper plate, or you can go on a palette if you have a palette, or little cups, or a regular plate like a dining plate, whatever you have, just to kind of mix up some of your paints. We're going to be doing that. So let's see, we are going to need some black and green and yellow of our gel colors. So again, you can use really any colors that you want to paint. Anything sticky, at least in my experience of the types that I've tried, will stick to Isomalt. So it can be like an edible acrylic paint, it can be a gel color, it can be an airbrush color, it can be powder like I was using before mixed with alcohol or mixed with piping gel. You can really use anything sticky that's going to stick on. The only thing that I found that doesn't stick by itself to Isomalt is dry petal dust. So like I couldn't just dry dust this white on because it's matte. It doesn't have any stickiness to it like luster dust does. It's just a petal dust. So you have to mix it with some sort of alcohol or something. But I'm going to use Artisan Accents colors. I'm using Midnight Black, Sunshine Yellow, and Leaf Green, and I'm going to put those into my little palette. And then what I like to add into those is the dilution solution. So this is also from Artisan Accents. This is going to be basically you mix it in with their gel colors, and it's going to thin down the gel color and turn it into a liquid that you can actually run through an airbrush, and you can hand paint. I use it a lot for hand painting because it just paints on really, really smoothly. The gel doesn't clump like it can by itself. I don't like to thin my gels with alcohol personally. You can use water, but it will take longer to dry. So I like this because it doesn't affect the color. Like alcohol can sometimes have a chemical reaction with some of the colors, and it can change their colors completely, where the dilution solution doesn't do that. So I'm just going to mix in a couple drops of the dilution solution in with my gel colors in my palette.
Kim would like to know, can you make shaker cookies with regular sugar cookie dough?
Absolutely. You can use any cookie dough that you want to. I tend to like this construction gingerbread, mostly just because I like to keep my cookies for a long time, because mine are obviously for display and nobody's going to eat them. They are totally edible and they still taste pretty good, this recipe, but you can use any kind of, cookie dough recipe that you prefer. I'm going to mix in a tiny bit of yellow into my green just because I find that this green is a little bit more cooler toned and I want it a warmer toned green. And then I'll just put a little bit. The black, I'm not adding too much of the dilution solution because I don't want it to thin down. It's a really, really dark, intense black, this Midnight Black from Artisan Accents, so I don't want to dilute the color. I just want to make it more paintable. But the green, I'm going to add a little bit more since we have a larger area to paint, and I want it a little bit runnier. And then the yellow, I'm going to kind of go in between the two. So you can see how many drops I'm adding as I go. The black, I'll probably only add maybe 2 drops, maybe 3. And then the yellow, I'll just add maybe 5 or 6 drops. And again, this is all, it's not super, super technical as far as how much to add. You can kind of start painting with it and see if you want it thicker or thinner. You can add more or less. And then the green, I'll add a little bit more. And then I'm just going to mix those up. So let's use, I'll use this one. Let's use a big one for the green. So I'm just going to give those a stir and make sure that they're nice and distributed. I can adjust the color if I want it a little bit different too, if I wanted. Okay, I have some paper towels back here, but I'm just going to set my brush off to the side here on a paper towel so I don't get the paint everywhere. And then use my little brush here, my detail brush for the yellow, since we'll be doing some centers with it. So see how I'm just mixing up that yellow and breaking it up really, really nicely. I'm kind of pushing my brush into the palette a little bit as I stir, so that it's kind of breaking up all those chunks. Perfect. And then we'll use just a little brush here for the black. So see, the black is much, much, much thicker because I didn't add very much dilution solution, and that's going to give you that super dark. I really like this black because it's not too green toned and it's not too purple toned like some blacks, since blacks are usually based on a green or a purple. So it's a really, really nice true black. They got a good balance of the two that cancel each other out. Okay. And so I'll give you guys just another minute to work on mixing your colors up while we wait for our window cookies. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and send those through now. We're just going to put this off to the side and grab our cookies and put those back in front of you once you are ready. Everybody doing good? Up just a hair.
Somebody asks, Allison asks if you can use royal icing.
Yep, you definitely can use royal icing. You can use any mediums to decorate. Obviously, I'm showing you the ladybugs and the flowers, but this is mostly about the actual window part. So if you want to decorate it any which way, that is totally up to you. There's so many different ways that you could decorate this and so many different themes. So yeah, definitely run with the idea and make it however you would like to.
Does it look a little blurry?
Yeah, I think it, the quality is not super great on like Instagram. It just does that automatically so that it loads faster.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we are not going to test with our finger to see if our pieces are cool. We're going to use a little tool, a toothpick, a paintbrush, anything but your finger. Even with gloves on, it's not a good habit to get into, just to kind of make sure that these are all set up. If you can press on it like pretty firmly and it makes a dent, it's not ready. Don't worry, you can take that dent out by torching over it until it goes back to melted. But you just want to make sure that these are now completely solid. Okay, I tested it first. I know that they're solid. And they should just peel right off of your mat. Okay, you can see you get a little bit of the texture from the mat, which we're going to melt away with those bubbles. But it actually doesn't look too bad. I mean, if you wanted to leave a little texture on it, it kind of looks cool, like a frosted glass look.
Somebody just joined. They wanted to know if you could update them briefly, but they can go back and watch the video at the end.
I would definitely recommend going back and watching it. Basically, what we've done so far is we poured our Isomalt in the middle of 2 of our cookies, and then we poured our little decorations. So we have our 2 little ladybug and flowers cooling off to the side. These are now cool, so I just took them off of the mat, and now I want to show you guys how to clear away the bubbles to get it crystal clear. Because I don't know if you guys can tell from here, but the top that was originally up is going to be shiny. And then the underneath is going to be a little bit more matte just from that matte. So I want to make sure that I clear away that matte side so that it's going to be nice and shiny. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're not working on our gold mat anymore. We're not working on the Teflon mat because I don't want to torch too much on it. Like I was saying earlier, these don't take the heat quite as well as the direct heat with the torch, quite as well as the silicone mat. So I've switched back to a silicone mat, or you can work, on a piece of foil or just something that's going to take the heat really nicely. A sheet pan even would be fine. We're going to flip these over so the underneath of the cookie is up, and I'm going to torch those bubbles away. Okay, so I'm just going to go very lightly. You don't want to burn your cookie, so if you need to turn your torch down, if it has a gauge, like this one does, I'm going to turn it down fairly low so that it's not super huge. This one tends to have a really big flame, so go a tiny bit bigger. And then I'm going to do one cookie and then hold them up so you can see the difference a little bit easier, but I'm just going to go in light layers. You don't want to do too much all at once until I see it get clearer. And if you still feel like you see some texture, you just want to do more, but you want to give it a second to cool in between so that your cookie doesn't sink. Because right now, since you flipped it, there's a tiny gap between the matte and the Isomalt right now. So if you add too much heat, it's going to, gravity's going to pull it down and it's going to sink, and then you get a wavy cookie. So I just want to do very, very light layers. The same thing with the bubbles. If you do too much at once, it could get too hot and fall down. So you want to go in light layers with that too. Okay, so I just gave it maybe 20-30 seconds, and then I'm doing another layer. You can see how those bubbles are starting to go away. From the side, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I can kind of see by looking at it from the side in the light, there's still a tiny, tiny kind of divots where those bubbles were. So I'm letting it cool off for a minute or so before I do the next one. You can do both at the same time if you want to alternate, just to give yourself something to do so you don't rush it. I know I get impatient, so it's good to have things to do in between. So that should be perfect for that one. I'm just going to give it a second to cool before I pick it up, of course. You don't want to pick up something you just blowtorched. All right. So when I pick it up and flip it over, I can see that this one is super, super clear, and then you can see the difference with the two cookies and how transparent they are. Okay, I'm going to flip that back over because I don't want it, if it's still a little warm, to take the impression of the silpat mat. So I'm going to flip it back over to how I had it before and put it off to the side to cool, and then go ahead and do my next cookie. If you find that you accidentally do torch too much and your cookie's sinking, just flip it back over really quick so it's sitting nice and flat on the mat. Let it cool all the way back down, and then any wrinkliness or any kind of waviness you should be able to torch away afterwards with the torch. So don't stress if you're a little heavy-handed with the torch, it's all good.
Christina says, do you seal it with PME glaze after torching?
Yes, so we're going to torch all these away, and that's going to be our next step, is to seal the fronts, or the insides and the outsides of the cookie. So I'm just going to do my light layers here, and then I'll show you guys glazing. Okay, so we're going to give that a second, and now you can see that you have those super, super clear cookies, and that gives you that perfect window pane. I'm going to do a tiny bit more torching after this cools for a minute on this last cookie, just because I see some tiny indents when I flip it back over. So again, give that just a second to cool. There we go. Alright, and then we're going to set those aside. I can put them back on my gold mat now if I want to, still flipped so they're upside down, off to the side to cool while we take out our little decorations. Okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, again, we are going to test these with a tool, not with our finger. The Ladybug should definitely be cool. You'll have to see if your flowers are or not. But like I said, they're really, really tiny, so they're not going to take very long. And then I'm just going to flex the mold like an ice cube tray, just kind of wiggle it around, and you should be able to pull out your little decoration. It's okay if they have rough edges. We're going to clean those up in just a second. Just like that. And now to clean up any of those rough edges, again, you want to turn your torch down pretty low. We're going to flip these guys over so that they are face down again, and very, very lightly and carefully torch around the edges, and you'll see it will just kind of melt into itself and smooth over those edges. So it doesn't take very much. You don't want to completely melt the little legs or the little indents on the flowers. And then you want to let those cool before you pick them up and touch them. Sometimes what I'll go back and do with a toothpick or with my little silicone tool here, here he is, is I will press.
Instagram live video ended, so.
Oh, sometimes after an hour it goes off, so go ahead and start another one.
Part 2.
Part 2. So like I was saying, basically I can torch the little white flower, and sometimes if the indents when you flip it back over aren't quite as indented as you would like in between the petals, you can use a toothpick for this too. After it cools for a minute or two, you can go back and indent those little divots. You can kind of see the difference.
Just start another live.
I don't know how.
Go to Instagram story.
Oh.
On the bottom there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
All right, we should be back on it in a second.
Okay.
All right, we're back.
We're back. Okay, sorry about that, Instagram guys. I think it times out after an hour. So part 2 of our demonstration here. The only thing that I just did, I don't know exactly where it cut off, was I just flipped over my little decorations so they're face down and then torched over the rough edges, and that will just melt and smooth them in. So now that they are cool, we can go ahead and paint them. You can work right on your mat if you want to. I'm just going to put it on here, so on a paper towel, so that I don't get any paint on it for when I continue to work. Move those up. Okay, so I have my paintbrushes ready here and my little ball tools, so go ahead and grab your little ball tools if you have them, or you can use a toothpick. You may want to cut the toothpick so that it has a wider end since they come to a point. You may want that wideness of the toothpick rather than the point. You'll have to see depending on how you want to paint them. But basically for the flowers, I'm going to do one of them with a yellow center and one of them all yellow with a black center. So I'm going to grab my little paint palette here. First, I'm going to take, you can use your ball tool for this if you would like to, or you can use a detailed brush, and we're going to just paint the center of one of these flowers. I'm just going to give my paint a stir again, and just do a little dot in the middle of my flower, and just kind of give it that little daisy effect. So that's all I'm going to do for him, and then I'm going to do the other one all yellow. So I'm painting all around the top and the sides as well. Remember that if you look at it from a different angle, you'll see the sides. I don't worry about the underneath, but you can paint over the center, or you don't have to since we're going to be painting black over it. Because we have that white base from the white powder, it's going to still look opaque. It's not going to be see-through. If I were to paint this clear gel color with the dilution solution over a see-through color, it'll still look see-through. So it kind of depends on what kind of base you have. If you have an opaque base or a transparent base, the paint will take that if you're using gel color or airbrush color. Okay, so you can see I just painted over that whole guy, and then I'm going to use my black on a paintbrush, or you can use your ball tool, and we're just going to add a little dot in the center. It doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, this is nature. Nothing in nature is going to be completely perfect. Of course, you can go more detailed with this if you want to shade with some different tones of yellow, if you want to use oranges and make them kind of ombre. You know, it's kind of up to you depending on what kind of flowers are in your garden, in your cookie. Put these off to the side, and then my little ladybug, I'm going to use definitely my ball tool now because I want pretty precise lines for my dots, and then there's a little line that goes about halfway up his back that I'm going to paint with my ball tool here, so I get a pretty good amount of paint on my tool, and that just gives you perfectly straight lines. With paintbrushes, the more that you press down on them, they get wider of a stroke, so they're not as reliable for painting perfect details, whereas ball tools are going to be completely hard, so no matter how hard you press on them, they're going to be consistent, which is why I like them for little details. So on my ladybug mold, there's 3 little dots on each side of his back, so I'm just going to paint those. Remember, this is tiny, so if you don't fill in every little crack and crevice, you won't be able to see the details as much from far away. Okay, one little more dot. Alright, and then I use a paintbrush to just paint over his little head with the black and his little feet. And that will just kind of pull the whole thing together. Sometimes I'll touch up some of those little spots I may have missed.
Do you know what kind of ball tool that is?
I've had this one for a really long time, so I'm not sure where I got this, but it's just like a little metal set. I know that a lot of cake stores probably have little sets like these, and you can also get these for like nail art and things like that. They use them to put stuff, you know, polka dots and everything on for the same reason.
Make It Sweet is on, they may know. Jennifer, if you're watching, you may know. Yeah,
these little ball tools. I think there was a set of 3 of these tools that I got, and of different sizes. I think this is the medium one. Okay, so there's my little painted pieces here. So that just kind of gives them a little bit of detail. I'll try and hold him up so you can see him a little bit better. Super, super cute. And I'll just set him off to the side with my window cookies while we're going to work on our fondant. So we're going to clean up our paints, and we're going to be working. You don't want to get rid of your green paint because we are going to paint on the fondant after this. But we're going to set up for fondant, so if you have a special mat you want to roll on, if you have your fondant, get that kind of started kneading. You can use either Crisco or powder in it, cornstarch in it if you would like, depending on what kind of fondant that you are using. Put my palette over here so that I don't spill it. I'm going to be using Satin Ice fondant, of course. They're my favorite kind of fondant. And I'm just going to be using some white. You can also use a base of yellow since we're painting green on top of it, depending on what variation you want. I'm going to be using Crisco. I like to use Crisco with my Satin Ice because it is going to make it nice and pliable.
Thank you to Satin Ice for providing the fondant too.
Yeah, Satin Ice is awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you, Joyce. Alright, so I'm just going to mix in a tiny bit of vegetable shortening. Just on my hands. And then when I roll it out onto my mat, I'm going to be using my little cutting mat to roll out on so that I can just cut it right out once I'm ready and I don't hurt my silicone mat with the X-Acto. So I'm actually putting it on top of my silicone mat this time because it'll keep it from sliding as much. So I'm just going to get it pliable. Roll it out with my super fancy PVC rolling pin here. I'm not really specific when I roll out my fondant and gum paste. I just kind of get it thin. If you want to use size guides or anything, you definitely can. I just get it pretty thin so that it's not a huge chunky piece and just try and get it as even as possible. But of course you can use the little rolling pin size guides if you want. You can use a pasta roller or a sheeter. It's up to you.
What about covering a cake? Do you do that by weight?
Yes, when I cover a cake, I go by weight. So instead of using a certain thickness, because I find that it's hard to get it completely consistent, I just, there's a really good size chart on Satin Ice's website of each size and shape of cake and how much you're going to need, how much fondant. And so I go by that, and then I just roll it out in a nice even circle or square or whatever I'm covering, as big as I need it. And that way I know that it's going to be the right thickness because I use the right weight to start with. Okay, so I just rolled that out nice and thin, and I'm going to grab my cutters. So my 2 circle cutters here. Kind of jiggle it a little bit, and then I like to keep my cutter there and remove the excess fondant from the outside. And we'll wrap that up in a second. And then I'll cut my center out, making sure that I don't press too hard at first. I just very gently lay it on top and look at it from all different angles to make sure it's going to be all as even as possible. We can tweak it a little bit if it doesn't come out perfectly even. And then peel that out. Alright. We're going to pick our top cookie, so pick whichever cookie that you would like for your very top one. I think I'm going to use this one here. And I'm going to paint a little bit of piping gel on the top of my cookie, or of course you can use icing, you can use chocolate, you can use like glucose or corn syrup if, like we were talking about earlier, if that's what you have, but I'm just using, this is from CK, some piping gel here on a flat brush. Let me grab a different one. Okay. And so I'm painting that directly onto the cookie. Oh, we're also going to glaze these. It's okay that we started decorating them on top of them, but we do want to glaze the inside before we assemble. So as soon as I put this on, I'm going to go ahead and stop and glaze it. But I'm just avoiding the Isomalt part, just putting it on the cookie itself. And by using those same cutters that we cut out, as long as your dough wasn't too soft and spreadable, it should fit right on top. It's okay if you see some of the cookie on the outside, that's totally fine. And now I'm just going to pick it up. I just like to use like a little palette knife or any kind of flat tool to just slide underneath so I don't stretch it out by peeling it up off the mat. So I just kind of loosen the whole thing, or almost the whole thing first. And then very quickly, I try not to press too hard when I set it down in case I need to pick it up and tweak it. And then it's going to stretch a little bit just from being fondant, it's stretchy, right? It's marshmallow, so just kind of got to push it back into place. Make sure that it looks nice and round. You can use your cutter as a guide if you kind of want to hover the cutter over it. Sometimes I'll tilt it and kind of push the fondant back into a circle shape, but usually, I mean, you know kind of what round looks like, so you can see if one side is kind of overlapping more. Sometimes I'll use my finger to roll out the fondant to wrap it over one edge or the other. Pick it up. Try not to touch the Isomalt part because you don't want to get any grease or anything on it. There we go. So I'm just kind of using my finger to rub over the cut edges, make sure that they're nice and smooth. Perfect. Okay. So there is my covered cookie, and of course you could flood these if you prefer. You can decorate them with modeling chocolate or regular chocolate. You can pipe right on them, whatever you want to do. And then we are going to start putting some decorations on, but before we do that, I want you guys to go ahead, you could do this step before or after you put the fondant on, it's okay either way, but you want to go ahead and stop and spray the underneaths of these, just the inside. You don't have to spray the top yet, because we're going to be decorating these more, so we can spray them at the very end once all the other decorations are on to be sprayed. But we want to spray the insides with the clear edible glaze spray, not on your table. Yes, you don't want it to get on your plastic mat or on your silicone mat or any of your tools. So we're going to pause for just a couple minutes, take this over a plastic bag, a tablecloth, outside, just somewhere that this is not going to get on anything, because it is edible somehow, but it doesn't come off of any tools or anything very easily, so especially silicone. So go ahead and take a minute if you're following along, and you want to spray the insides of both of your cookies. Don't worry about spraying the outside yet, because we can spray everything all together at the end, but go ahead and spray the insides of your cookies, and then it's alcohol based, so just give it like 5 minutes to dry. So I'm just going to put out a couple paper towels back here. I'm going to go across the room where there isn't anything that I'm worried about overspraying on, and just give them a spray. Now is a good time too. If you have any questions, we'll go ahead and stop for a minute, and I can answer any of those.
Is it possible to still order everything?
Yes, it's definitely possible. We still have the kits online. We still have all of the different tools and the basic kits and everything. So if you would like to order after you see this and you want to try it while watching the replay, you definitely can. It's all on there.
Somebody, Candy and Plenty wrote, does this taste good?
Yeah, it definitely, as by itself, it's, the spray itself.
Yeah,
if you do a thin enough coat, it's going to not really affect the taste, especially if you flavor your Isomalt and you flavor your cookie. I've never had any problem. As long as you don't put too much of it on, then you can taste it a little bit, just because it is like an alcohol base, so. So I sprayed those across the room, and then now I'm just waiting for them to dry for a minute or two, and just kneading my fondant, keeping it nice and pliable while it's drying.
Do you put the fondant on both cookies?
I just put it on one cookie, the top cookie.
What did you use to adhere the fondant? Because the video had a little...
Oh, did it have a little lag? I used piping gel to attach my cookies. You can use really anything. You can use icing, you can use chocolate, you can use like a glucose, or you can use a corn syrup. Anything sticky that's going to dry really nicely into your cookie is going to be fine.
Kelly Stahl, can you repeat your question? I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Can you... I'm not quite sure about something about moving it with the palette knife.
All right, so it's almost dry. We'll just give it another minute. If you have a little fan, you can speed it up by putting that on it, like a little battery fan, but it's not too big of a deal.
Okay, Yvonne says she's having an issue making the Isomalt smooth and keeping it flat.
Yes.
Is she doing it too fast?
If it's that if it's in the torching step, you probably just haven't done enough. So just torch a little bit more if you still feel like you see craters on it. Yeah, or if you're over torching it, then it's going to start sinking and it's going to get wavy. So it could either be that you're over or under torching it. Without me being there, it's hard to see. If you're still having this issue later, send me pictures, DM me pictures, and I will be able to help you more in depth. But remember, if you over torch, it's going to start sinking and getting wavy and maybe some stretch marks or wrinkles. But if you're under torching and it still has a texture or a bubbly kind of pattern on it, then you're not torching enough. So you may just have to do lighter layers of torching, but do more layers, letting them cool in between longer.
Are the gold mats on the website?
Yes, the gold mats. This one is a half mat that we're using, and then there's also one that's double the size. That's the full mat if you want to do a whole bunch of cookies at once.
Someone was asking if you have a whole list of everything used.
Yes, I do have a supply list. I can go ahead and post that again. Right after this, because I don't think I can post pictures in the comments here. But you can check that out on my Facebook page. I did post it, and my Facebook page is under my name, Sidney Galpern, and I'll post that right after this.
Mitchie suggested using the cutting mat to fan it.
Oh, that's a great idea, Mitchie. It should be mine's about dry now. So if you're in a less humid place than here in Florida, it will definitely not take as long, but it only took about 5 minutes or so.
Yvonne thinks maybe she was over torching.
Oh, okay. It just takes playing around with it a little bit and kind of just getting a feel for it.
Okay, so Kelly rewrote her question.
Yes.
Can you place the cookie on the fondant, then move it?
Yeah, you can paint the piping gel on the cookie or the piece and then press it into the fondant. I just find when you peel the mat away, it sometimes sticks to the mat and stretches out. So it definitely just depends on the person. Some people prefer that way. That's totally fine. All right, I got a tiny bit of pattern from the paper towel, but we're going to be painting and texturing all this in a sec, so I'm not going to worry about that just from flipping it over. And we're going to roll out a little bit more fondant now, and we're going to make our grass pieces to attach. So I'm just going to roll out another nice thin piece of fondant on my cutting mat.
A little higher. Just at the top of the yellow mat. That's perfect. Kelly says because she tends to pull things out of shape.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I definitely get that. Yeah, play around with it. See what works best for you. You can also use powder when you roll out. Like, you can mix in vegetable shortening at first, but then when you actually roll it out, you can use powder on your table, and it won't stick as much as the vegetable shortening will. So that will help it to come up a little bit easier, too, once you're moving it. That way you don't have to yank it. Okay, so now we're going to grab our X-Acto knives, and we're just going to cut some grass shapes. So I'm just going to do some triangles, kind of some wavy shapes. Remember, this is your species of grass, so it can be more kind of abstract and whimsical. It can be more perfect triangles or wisps, but I start out by cutting kind of a straight-ish line towards the bottom, and then I'm just going to cut some triangles up. I don't like to do a huge difference in how thin my grass is, as far as it does come to a point, but the whole length of it is going to be pretty consistent. It's not going to be super drastic in how pointed it is. I like to do things pretty straight up and down, so I'm just going to do a line and then almost a parallel line, just at a slightly different angle to get some, kind of like if you take a pizza slice and you stretch it out, that's the shape we're going for. And you just want to do a whole bunch of these in different thicknesses, different heights. Remember, we can cut them down later, so just a whole bunch. I like to cut all in the same direction. You can also use a little pizza cutter or a wheel cutter for this if you want. Or if you have a cutter that you like a grass cutter, that's totally fine. You can put some texture in it if you want. We're going to be painting this a lot, so I'm not really going to worry about adding texture. I'm going to add texture with the color. Okay. And I'm just going to pull all the excess away. There we go.
Do you have any more torches? They're all sold out online.
We currently only have the torches in our Isomalt Basics kit right now, but we should be getting some more, I think, in a couple weeks, right?
I think next week.
We actually soon. Just
Yeah.
They're held up with everything going on, but we should have them very shortly.
All right, so I have all of my grass pieces here. I'm gonna grab my cookie, decide what you want as your top. So if you want, any certain point as the top, remember that the bottom, pretty much half is gonna be covered by grass. So if you have maybe some little spots that you don't wanna see, or the fondant got a little bit messed up in one spot, use that as the bottom half so that you can cover it up with that grass. And then we're gonna use our piping gel to just start attaching this onto the cookie. So I'm just going to pick out pieces of grass. If you have any rough edges on each side from where you cut, just slide your fingers up and over it a little bit and smooth out those edges, or leave them rough. Remember, it's grass. It's going to get stepped on and it's going to get blown around in the wind, so it doesn't have to be too particular. I try and use the bigger grass pieces towards the outside, and remember, this is your cookie. It can overlap more, it can overlap less. You can have more grass, less grass. Depends on how much rain it got that day, right? So
Chef Blake says, hey.
Hey, Chef Blake. All right. So I'm just going to start kind of wisping my grass. I'm going to put my cookie here if you need a visual inspiration. Yeah. I kind of did them in an up and around shape, mimicking the circular shape of the cookie. So see how I'm kind of curving the piece of grass to go with the fluidity of the circle. And then I try to kind of have the excess overlapping on the bottom so that I can just cut the excess just like that, so it still has that round shape on the bottom. You don't get a big flat bottom. Okay, and I like to go from each outside edge and then work my way towards the center. So I'm going to now go on the opposite side. You can have it overlapping the isomalt a little bit. You can have it going off the edge of the cookie a little bit. Just play around with the shapes that you have and see what you like. Okay, so I just do a rough cut at the bottom and then I smooth it out with my finger, and I know I'm going to cover a lot of that with more grass, so I'm not being too nitpicky about this. I'm going to add a little bit more piping gel. You don't need a ton, just enough to make it sticky.
Yeah, someone else. What did you paint on to adhere to the grass?
Yes, I am using piping gel, but really any kind of edible glue is going to work with fondant.
Carly'd like to know if you can stick an Isomalt piece to a painted Isomalt piece.
You can, yes. You may have to add a little extra glue just because the paint can act as a barrier sometimes, but you absolutely can attach painted pieces together. Sometimes, if possible, if you cannot paint the specific area you want to touch and attach, then I'll paint around a certain spot, if that makes sense, so that I have a nice unpainted area to attach on. Okay, so see how I'm attaching and then cutting with each grass piece? You can do it all at the end, but I think that this just gives me a little bit more preciseness to my piece. And then I like to do some folded grass pieces as well, so I have a nice big one in the center here that I think adds some dimension. So all I'm going to do is kind of fold this over at an angle, and it just gives you a little kind of broken grass piece here. Paintbrush.
Can you move the white cookie onto the orange so we can see it better?
Oh, yes, I can. There we go. How's that?
We'll know in a minute.
Okay, and then you could go back. Obviously, you can spend as much time or as little time on this as you would like, depending on, how many layers of grass you want to do and how precise you want to do it. But I'm just going to do one or two more pieces that I have left here. And then these I have a lot of excess because I don't want them to overlap too much of the isomalt. Otherwise, you won't be able to see all that hard work that you put into making them nice and clear windows. I'm just going to do maybe one more piece right there in the front. There we go. It's okay if you get glue overlapped because we're about to paint over it with a liquid, so it'll all disappear. And then I'm just going to go around the bottom of my cookie where it looks a little bit rough, and you can trim off excess, you can smooth in excess, and just make sure it looks nice and finished on that bottom. It doesn't look too squared and flat. Kind of cut it and shape it with the roundness here. And then some of the white may kind of blend in together right now, but when we paint it, we'll just take extra care to make sure that we bring out all of the edges and that we shade it nicely. So you can go ahead when you're done. I'll give you another minute or two to work on your fondant, but you can wrap up your fondant. We're going to be done with it for now. And so I'm just going to put it back in my bag.
Kathleen's worrying about how you can paint the grass green without getting paint on the clear Isomalt.
You have a couple options for that. So you can potentially paint the pieces first. I don't like to do that because I feel like I just wipe off all the paint when I pick them up and attach them on. So what I'm going to recommend is, and you'll see when I do it, that I paint with a wider brush for the very centers and like the bulk of the pieces. But then once I get to the edges and the ones that are overlapping on the clear, then I will use a very, very small brush. And another trick to not painting on your Isomalt is you can take a piece of plastic wrap and you can cut it to the shape. So I would just lay the plastic wrap over and use like a marker to trace exactly where I want the plastic wrap to cover, and then I take it off and cut along that line with scissors, and then you can put that plastic wrap right onto your cookie, and that is going to kind of protect it, and then you can peel it off at the end. So usually I just use very fine brushes, and I'm just very, very careful. Or if you accidentally paint on it, go with it. Maybe the edge of the Isomalt needs to have like a green ombre effect or a green or black border. You know, you can just add that onto, you know, kind of as the look of your cookie. It'll be a little bit more of like a tinted glass look. So, okay. So we can put away our piping gel because we're going to use Isomalt to attach everything in just a second. So I'll put that off to the side. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and paint, and then we will attach the little decorations onto it. So I will paint first, and we're going to do a very, very kind of streaky paint effect with this. I'm going to keep it on the orange. You can put it on a paper towel if you want, just so you don't get paint on your mat, but because it does pop better on the orange, like you guys were saying, I'm going to go ahead and leave this on the orange mat, and then I'll just wash it later. So I'm going to grab my green paint back. And we're going to use our fan brushes and our wide flat brushes at first, and then we'll go back with some detail brushes. So if you need to wash any brushes from earlier, you can go ahead and do that. And in just a minute, we will paint over with our green. How's everybody doing? You guys doing good? Can't wait to see all of your cookies later. Like I said, I'm going to put out a post after this to go ahead and have everybody post all of their finished cookie pictures in the comments so that we can see each other's, even if we're not all friends with each other yet. We can go ahead and see each other's. You guys doing okay? Yeah, I can see the little thumbs up and the little hearts and emojis on the side, so if you guys are doing good, go ahead and send some little hearts so I can see how you're doing.
Everybody likes it.
Awesome. Okay, so we will go ahead and start painting now. I'm going to use, just kind of play around with the brushes and see what works best for you. I really like super frayed brushes and fan brushes and things for adding this kind of texture onto our pieces. So I'm going to use more of those kind of brushes. I even have a couple over here that are super, like I've used them a ton. We've used them in classes, and they've really, really worked for a long time, and they're getting kind of frayed. That works perfect for these, so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of paint on our green. And I like to go in all one direction with the grass. You can see even up here on the fondant, I'm painting up and down. That's just aesthetic preference. That's what I'm going to be doing. I have a paper towel next to me just to kind of blot. And then you can go up or down, but remember, if you're painting downwards, you could accidentally flick some Isomalt onto some of the Isomalt. So I'm just going to, let's go sideways with my hand here, kind of wipe off my brush so that there's not a ton of paint on the brush. And I'm just going to go, even leaving some of the white showing through in some areas, just to add variation. This green is a little bit lighter than the one I used, but I think it'll still be really pretty and kind of pastel. But as you start painting, remember you can layer paint, so if it's not quite as dark as you want, you can add a little bit more color onto your palette. can see the more paint that you add on at once, the more solid the color is going to be. So if you want it more variated, make sure you really dry off that brush. I'm not really worrying too much about the very edges or the inside edge or outside edge of the cookie right now, because that's when I go back and use my detailed brushes. And the more times that you go over the paint, the more streaky it's going to be as well.
Allison would like to know, how do you store your leftover Isomalt?
I store my leftover Isomalt just in a Ziploc, in a sealed container. You can put it in a Glad container. Any sort of airtight container is going to be best. Even if your Isomalt does get clouded from the humidity, once you melt it, it goes back to completely clear. So don't worry if it gets a little bit cloudy. It will all go back.
Hi, Tina. She said her cookie is the example of what happens when you torch too much.
Oh, no! Well, remember that you can do that again on purpose, reheat it, and get it nice and pliable again, and flip it back right side up, and it should flatten back into the flat mat, and if you let it cool all the way, you should have another chance to go back and you can kind of heat any of the wrinkles out of it. But worst comes to worst, just break the Isomalt out of your cookie as much as you can get out of it, and do another one. Remember, Isomalt can be remelted as many times as you want. So see how I'm just going over the whole thing? And then, of course, just like with anything, you can add more or less detail into this if you wanted to let this dry and go back with another layer of a darker green to add a bit more variation. You can do that if you wanted to go back. If you add white, either powder or gel color, into your gel colors or airbrush colors or whatever you're doing, it makes it opaque. So even if you wanted to go back with a light color on top of a dark color, if you add some white into it, you can do that and you will be able to see it on top. So see, I'm just using the Y brush very lightly for the bulk of it, and then I'll go back with my detailed brush here in just a sec to get the edges and everything that I'm a little bit worried about overpainting onto my cookie. Make sure to get those sides too, the underneath.
Sam the puppy says hi.
Hi, Sam the puppy.
And Kathy.
Oh yeah, and Kathy.
Can Isomalt get too old to use?
Generally, it's going to be fine. Sometimes it can get a little bit old, and it may not go as clear, or if you've used it a whole bunch of times, it may not go quite as clear if you've mixed air into it.
Maybe don't eat that.
Yeah, maybe just don't eat that one, but you can still use it. It should still melt back down.
Practice.
Yeah, definitely for practice pieces. Okay, so I've pretty much got my whole cookie covered now. Again, if you wanted to go back over with some darker colors, add a little bit more green onto your palette and paint right in. I am going to do that. Just add some straight green. I'm not going to dilute it this time. And just to kind of add some variation. So I'm really going to dry off the brush because this is going to be dark now. And you see how that's going to give me a very liney effect. If you need your grass to pop a little bit more, take a detailed brush and go ahead and brush around the edges of your grass pieces to make them pop a little bit. Remember, there's lots of different ways that you can paint. So depending on what style that you usually paint in, you can use that. So I'm just going to kind of do a quick overview here of the whole cookie. And then if you want afterwards, I don't want to bore you guys with sitting here detail painting for forever, so if you want to go back and paint those details or anything after the live, you're more than welcome to do that. But I'm just going to get the majority of it covered. If you start with a yellow base, you don't have to worry as much about painting in every little crack and crevice because it'll just look like a highlight since yellow goes to green. You can also, if you wanted to make this super, super bold, you can go back with a teensy tiny bit of black or dark brown and just kind of trace the edges of your pieces very roughly with the same kind of brush strokey feel. That'll make everything pop. You can go back and add some shadowing, some highlight points. I mean, painting in itself is kind of a whole technique, so there's lots of different ways you can go about this. This is just kind of a quick way. You can also paint your whole cookies before you add the grass if you want to not have to worry about getting into the cracks and crevices. That's another option. This is just how I do it, but you guys will find what works best for you. Alright, so I think that's about good. Remember to pick it up and look from other angles, because flat, it looked like it was pretty covered, but when I picked it up, I saw all of the little white kind of bits. So that's where you'll go back in with your detail brush. I'm just going to use my wide brush really quickly here, but that's where you'll go in with your detail brush to kind of fill in all those gaps. But again, if you want to go back and do that at the end, you're more than welcome to. And you can spend as much or as little time on it as you would like. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and we can start assembling. So kind of put your paint off to the side.
There's a question, is it possible to post a replay?
Yes, this will be up for replay on my Facebook. I believe Instagram you can go back and rewatch it too within 24 hours, but it will be up forever on my Facebook so that you can go back and watch it as many times as you like. If you're on Instagram, my Facebook, you can find the link in my bio on my profile, but it's under my name, Sidney Galpern. Okay, so we have our little cookie done here, and we're going to start to assemble now, so go ahead and grab your other ice malt filled cookie, you want to grab your empty cookie, you want to grab your decorations.
And not the orange mat.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to torch?
Yeah, I'm going to move it off that guy. Yeah, you don't want to torch on this orange mat, or put the ice malt bowl on the orange mat, because it's plastic, it'll just melt. We are going to reheat a little bit of the ice malt to attach them all together. It doesn't matter which color, because you're not going to see it. I'm probably going to go ahead and just use my white, and because I have a lot of it, and just pop it back in until it comes back to a boil. So if you're following along at home, go ahead and just clean up your stuff, go back to working on your silicone mat, and then heat up your leftover ice malt of either your red or your white or clear or whatever you would like.
You can use other items to glue it together?
Yes, you can also use chocolate to glue it together. You can use royal icing if you want to. You'll just have to make sure you let it dry really, really well. I like to use ice malt because it melts into the cookie really, really strong. And I also use it to fill in gaps later. If you were to have a little gap between your cookies and the sprinkles were falling out, it almost works like a spackle, but you can do that with royal icing or with chocolate too if you want. I just tend to have a lot of ice malt on hand, and it's really strong. It's clear, so you don't really see it, and it's going to dry almost instantly, so you don't have to wait, which is why I like to use the ice malt. So I have my two cookies up here that have the ice malt in them, and then I have the empty cookie on the bottom that we're going to sandwich in between them. Go ahead and get your sprinkles ready too. I reheated my white ice malt here as a glue, so I'm going to put that off to the side. You can use a toothpick to spread the ice malt on. You can use a silicone tool. You can use pretty much anything high heat that you can spread. Remember, if it's not silicone, you can go ahead and soak it afterwards, and that way you don't have any ice malt stuck to your tools. Make sure it's not plastic, though. You don't want anything that's going to melt. Alright, so what we're going to do first is just hold our cookies on to each other. Remember, in the beginning I said how you can sand them down, so if they don't match up perfectly, you can use a little bit of sandpaper. But these look pretty good. I sanded them earlier, so all we're going to do is spread a little bit of ice malt onto the first cookie. I don't like to do it on the one I'm holding because you don't want to accidentally drip it onto your hand. So go ahead and spread it onto the flat cookie. I'm going to use my sugar shaper again, but again, you can use a toothpick or a spatula. You don't want to spend too much time on this because the glue is drying. So I'm just going to add a couple dots here and there. And then very quickly, you only have a few seconds before this is going to set up. So try and place it down on. Kind of hold it there for a second.
It won't slip out the gaps?
It shouldn't slip out the gaps unless you have really, really big gaps, and then you can go back, and what I'll do at the end is I'll pick this whole thing up and I'll spread some of it in, because I actually like to paint the sides of my cookies, so you can't, if you have a little bit of gap filler in there, you can just paint it green and it'll all blend together. Okay, I feel like part of my cookie didn't quite stick, so I'm gonna do a tiny bit more. If your cookie doesn't stick together, you just may not have gone quick enough. So you can pick it back up, add a little more. Remember not to press too hard. There we go. Okay. So I'll just let that cool for a second. That cookie is attached. Now before we add the second paneled cookie that we were just painting, you want to add in your sprinkles. So once you get that attached on, you just want to sprinkle some of your sprinkles right in the center. They're going to want to jump and go everywhere. That's okay.
It's fun.
It's fun. It's a shaker cookie. You can do as much or as little as you want. I don't like to overfill these because you want some space in there for your pieces to be able to move around. So that should be perfect. Okay, and then I'm going to take my Isomalt. Remember, if your Isomalt has thickened up and it's not quite hot enough, like I can see mine has, I'm going to pop it back in the microwave so that it's super hot. The hotter it is, the better it will adhere.
Can you test it together, like to see if you have enough?
Yeah, you can put the other one on top and kind of see as you go. I should. Moving around. It's a little bit humid here today, so sometimes you just gotta... There we go.
Sometimes you just gotta shake it.
Sometimes you just gotta shake it. Once you seal it together, it should be pretty airtight because you have the two cookies sealed together. There we go. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to wait for the bubbles to settle a little bit. All right. Remember, before you attach them on, you want to make sure that you had glazed the sides that are going to be towards the inside.
Where can you get the sugar shapers?
You can get the sugar shapers right from Innovative Sugar Works. You can get them from a lot of cake decorating supply stores have them, so I would check your local supply store and ask them. They're awesome for everything, but for fondant and gum paste and chocolate too, but they're awesome with Isomalt because they are a silicone compound. There we go. So I'm just going to press my cookie. I'm pressing more from the sides so that I don't hurt the top. The reason that I don't assemble these before I decorate them is because if I were to not like how it came out, so if this was a design I was doing the first time, I didn't waste 3 whole cookies and the Isomalt before I realized that. So if I didn't like it, I can just swap out the top half for something else. And that way, there we go. You have all your different pieces. So I have them assembled now. It feels pretty stuck on there, and we're going to use the same glue for attaching on our little decorations. Now, if you want to, you can, the reason that I'm using the white glue here is because the clear pieces like the Ladybug is going to pop better on a white background. So you can even paint the backs of them with some pearl dust or some white color before you attach it, and that will make them pop. Just because if you put it on a dark surface, it could make it look a little bit darker. So just keep that in mind. Figure out where you want your decorations first before you attach them, because once you put the Isomalt on, it's going to be stuck permanently. So you want to make sure it's going to be nice and stuck down there. I think I'm going to just make a cute little field down here. Just kind of play around with it, figure out where you want everything to be.
And they can make more later.
Absolutely. If you want to decorate it a little bit fuller like I did mine, you definitely can attach them on. Maybe I'll do my 3 little guys down here. Do them more as a bottom accent. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of my glue where I want my Ladybug. Remember, if you're using clear, you won't see this, so you don't have to worry about over gluing. Right there, and we'll put some right here, but you see how that white just makes that clear red pop really nicely. And we'll do that one here. And it will melt into the fondant, it'll melt into the Isomalt, and just give you a really, really strong base. Just like that. I'll let those cool for a minute, let you guys get all your pieces done. Get them all put together. Okay, and then there we have our shaker cookie. Ta-da!
So just go back and highlight and...
Yeah, exactly. So I'll go back probably with my palette here, and you can mix in a little bit of brown or even the darker green on a detail brush. Let me find my little detail brush here. So if you want to make all of these pieces pop a little bit more, I just kind of almost do like a brushed embroidery effect where I go back, I add some paint to the edge of each grass, and then I will kind of brush it, maybe dry off my brush a little bit, and then just kind of brush it and blend it into the piece so that I'm not pulling the dark color in the center. I'm just kind of softening the edge in between the pieces, and you see how that makes it stand out a little bit more against each piece. So you can add more variation into the actual cookie, you can add more definition between your grass, and then what I like to do at the end, you can leave your cookie showing, it's totally personal preference, but I think it ties the whole thing together a little bit to go ahead and just paint that green directly onto your cookie itself. So I'll go in with a nice wide brush and that really liquidy green, and then I will just paint onto the cookie, onto the side of the fondant, and just make sure everything is going to match and look really, really good all together.
Can you use royal icing as glue instead for the Isomalt pieces?
Yes, you definitely can. If they're really lightweight and small like this, you can use royal icing or you can use chocolate. Sometimes with really tiny pieces, you can even use piping gel. It just depends on, these are sitting flat, so they're not really going to be like, gravity's not pulling them down like if it was upright, and you don't need a super, super strong glue, but obviously the stronger it is, the safer it's going to be.
Melissa said her sprinkles are getting a little bit stuck. Any thoughts?
Make sure that you glazed the two inside panels before you put it together. That's going to be the biggest thing for your sprinkles not getting stuck. But basically just kind of give them a shake a little bit. Yeah, if it's in a really humid environment, you may want to do 2 layers of the glaze even before you assemble it. And then now, that was on the inside 2 halves, but now I want to spray the outside. So these little guys and the Isomalt panes, you want to, now that it's assembled, once you're done painting, you're done adding pieces, this would be the absolute final step. We're going to glaze the whole thing over the whole top and then flip it over and glaze the whole underneath to make sure that nothing is going to get cloudy. You guys can see I made this cookie probably about almost 2 weeks ago now, a couple days before I announced this, and you can see that it's still completely clear. It hasn't got cloudy or sticky or anything like that. It's super, super flat and smooth. Okay. So if you guys have any last questions, please feel free to write them in the chat here. Like I said, if you're watching this at a later date, I'll be going through the comments on here and answering anything that I can. But if you want to direct message me with any questions, if you had a more specific question, you can send me pictures and I can kind of guide you through as you go. I really, really appreciate everyone for tuning in. This was so awesome, and you guys on Instagram too.
Stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe.
Healthy.
Be healthy, everybody. Would you guys be interested in doing another one of these? If you would, let me know. I have some other ideas here and some other videos that we're going to be going through too. And so a couple of the upcoming videos that I have planned, me and Myra, who's actually the inventor of the new Zioto heat pen, we're going to be doing some demonstrations and videos kind of together, but not together, all put together, filmed in different locations. So we're working on that right now to kind of show you guys the new heat pen that's out. I have a couple other ideas for some other projects and Instagram lives, working with a couple other artists too, doing some collaborations. So yeah, let me know what you guys would like to see and different ideas if you have any ideas. And remember to make sure you post your pictures and tag me, and to definitely post on the post that I'm going to put out of my picture so that you guys can share around your pictures.
Okay, a couple last minute questions. Yes. The gold mats, they're on the website.
Yes.
On our store.
Yeah, simicakes.com, simicakes.com. It's our website.
Okay, Yvonne said, if we baked thicker cookies and just used 2, I assume we can place them back to back with the outside and then put them together?
Correct. So the Isomalt would be farthest apart. So flip them so that the Isomalt is spread apart. And then, like I said, you don't have to fill up your cookies quite as full if you have thicker cookies. And that will give you a natural gap in between the 2.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if there was another question here.
I'm just going to flip my camera back around here this way, guys, so we can see each other now.
A couple people said they need to remake them, but that's good because you can kind of go through fast with this one.
Exactly, and sometimes it's good to kind of try it and watch the whole thing all together, and then you can go back, once you have that knowledge and it's all kind of sunken in so that you can see everything.
Great, just let me get through the last questions.
Yeah,
here.
Definitely tell me if you guys have any different ideas for more future projects. If you guys would be interested in more projects like this, I have a couple other ideas, spring and different kinds of summery ideas for that coming up. So let me know if you'd be interested.
Robin wants to know, her Isomalt pulled away from her cookie. Any ideas?
It may not have been hot enough when you poured it. So I would pour it a little bit hotter next time so that it really adheres to the cookie. Also, make sure there's no grease on your cookies. If you had any like cooking spray or oil or anything, Isomalt won't stick to that. So make sure that it's all completely dry.
I think that's it for now. They're giving us lots of ideas, so we'll
awesome.
definitely read through those.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back and read through those after this. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to write me a direct message.
Somebody said Frankenstein. I think he's hiding behind you.
Do you guys see Frankenstein back there? He's all Isomalt. That one would be a little bit longer. He's all hand sculpted, but definitely a good idea. Awesome.
The heat pen, turquoise stones.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Somebody's having a hard time finding the dilution solution.
I would definitely check your local store, your local cake store first and see if they have it.
I believe the Sweet Chalet.
The Sweet Chalet has it, so you can order it online from them. I know that they definitely have it, so that's usually where I get mine.
And I think that's all the questions we have right now. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. I can't wait to see all of your beautiful cookies, and hopefully I will see you guys again soon. Bye, guys.